Welcome to Lesson 2 of Module 1. This lesson will focus on how experimental mindset will help us discover more about the obstacles we are trying to address, and at the same time, be more scientific in our approach while we develop the routine and skills necessary in building the culture of process improvement. Lesson 1 discussions on metrics are vital in this lesson because this will serve as the quantitative basis in measuring and evaluating the results of our experiment. There are two major parts in this lesson. The first part will discuss how important experimental mindset in doing process improvement, and the second part will discuss how do we conduct experiment in a more structured way that will help us develop that routine and skill necessary for process improvement. Allow me to review some key concepts in Kata that we have already discussed during Course 1. Again, Kata starts with reviewing the vision of the organization. This serves as our guide to the overall direction of our improvement. This will also serve as the anchor or inspiration of the organization on why we need to do this. However, it is too far away and therefore necessary to turn this into a specific challenge, which is the first step in Kata. In some organizations, they call this as their annual goal or OKR. After we have set our challenge, we first understand where we are now. We call this the current condition. Then we set the next target condition because we understand that we cannot meet the challenge outright. The next target condition will serve as our beacon in achieving the challenge. As we move from the current condition to the next target condition, we will experience obstacles and hence the need for a more specific approach in solving these obstacles, which is really the focus of our lesson 2. But to do this, we might need to step out of our comfort zone and shape our mindset to take smaller steps rather than big steps slowly. I would like to tackle in this slide how we cascade the challenge to the organization. The top management are responsible in formulating the overall challenge or the strategic direction, and the managers and employees are responsible in executing them. In the execution, both managers and employees have very important roles. The employees are the one executing the improvement and the managers as the coach of the improvement. We must be able to develop that scientific approach and teach it to our employees so we develop them how we overcome these obstacles in achieving our challenge. This leads us to the focus of our discussion in Lesson 2. It is not about the discussion of the lean tools and techniques because by now I'm sure you are very familiar with almost all of these techniques, but the focus of Lesson 2 is the less visible, wherein the managers as the teachers of the way of thinking and the employees are the one who is executing them. So this is the focus on how we can develop that scientific approach in developing that routine and eventually develop the culture of process improvement. But before we even talk about culture, we should first understand how we develop mindset and behavior. Kata would like to leverage on very specific steps, and we call this the improvement kata as we discussed in Course 1. These improvement steps will help us modify our behavior, our actions, and eventually our mindset, simply because as we practice these steps, we can see and feel the effect of the improvement. So as we keep on doing this, practicing this, we will now develop that routine and skills in process improvement and eventually develop that culture. And hence Kata provided us with these two routines to modify our behavior. These two routines, as we have discussed in Course 1, are the improvement kata and coaching kata. For this lesson, we will emphasize on improvement kata, specifically on how we conduct experiments to solve our obstacles in achieving the next target condition. To operationalize the improvement kata concept, we need to go back to our kata board. So in this slide, it shows an example, a snapshot example of a filled up kata board. So again, to recall, the first step is to identify our challenge. Second is to understand our actual condition. Then third is to set the next target condition and identify now the obstacles that hinders us to achieve the target condition. These obstacles can be solved in a series of experimentation, or sometimes we call it the PDCA cycles, which is the focus of this lesson. So this lesson would like to dig in further on how we conduct these experiments in solving these obstacles. Let's now zoom in on how we address these obstacles in addressing our next target condition, or in the long term achieving our business challenge. So sometimes we have this behavior of jumping into conclusions, and that's quite normal because it's our human nature to have that bias based on our experiences and the data that we have. But most of the time, we realize that when we implement these solutions didn't work, or the problems will repeat themselves. And it's because of our current knowledge threshold, which is actually normal. But how do we battle that behavior of being biased or jumping into conclusions in addressing these obstacles? So to address these biases and current knowledge threshold, the only way to do it is to conduct series of experiments. So to illustrate that, let's say this is your current knowledge threshold, and this is your next target condition, or where you want to be. And the gap in between are the obstacles that you need to understand and address. So by conducting the different cycles of experiment, we can learn from it and then adjust accordingly our interventions for us to achieve the next target condition. Conducting experiments are not easy, not only because it will take a lot of effort and time, but because we also need to modify some of our mindset, especially in accepting failure. It's our human nature that we are not comfortable in experiencing failure, but kata tells us that we learn the most from what doesn't go well. So by conducting experiments, it will now go beyond your current threshold and see more about the reality and the facts. So we must also admit that we don't know everything, even though we've been in the process for some time, and even though we have all the data in the world. But as we progress in our experiment, we will learn something more that goes beyond what we see in our data in our process. More thoughts on experimental mindset. All failures are temporary. What you learn in the process always helps you move forward. Every experiment teaches you something new, and every new lesson you learn increases your capability to accomplish great things. So let's go back to our kata board and highlight where the experiment is happening. So in your kata board, it is located on your upper right corner, and we label it as PDCA cycle record. In this record, you can see two major parts. The first part, the left side part, is the predictive side, wherein we have written this before the experiment. So this part elaborates on what do you expect after you've implemented the solution that you have chosen. And then on the right part, we call this the evidence side, or written after the experiment. So this is where the time that you investigate what happened after you implemented the solution and what you have learned, what worked and what didn't work. So this is the key aspect of doing experiment, what you have predicted versus what the evidence are telling you. So basically this will highlight, this will help us go beyond our threshold and our biases. Doing experiments in your improvement cycles is just like doing your PDCA cycle, which we are very familiar with. So the P here, we just label it as prediction. This is our prediction on what will be the result after we have implemented our initial solution. Then the do part is the action wherein we conduct the experiment. The check part is to check the evidence of what's the result of the experiment. We collect the facts and learn from it. And then after learning from it, we act on it, right? So we evaluate and adjust based on what you have learned, and then repeat the cycle as we achieve the next target condition and eventually the business challenge. in conducting experiment, it is very important that it should be structured and scientific. So by practicing this structured experimentation will prevent you from reverting back to your old habits. So the structured experimentation will be discussed further in the next part of this lesson. But for now, to give you an idea, the structured experimentation will start with the target condition, understanding your actual condition, identifying the obstacles and its root causes, plan the next steps and your expectation. The steps here are your solutions that you formulated based on the different principles that you have and the root cause identified. Then you conduct the actual experiment, check for the result, and then adjust accordingly on what you have learned in the result of your experiment. So by going through this structured experimentation, you now develop a more scientific approach in addressing your obstacles. Now, what will happen if you don't have structured approach? So we have observed 3 frequent behavior patterns in different improvement team. The first part is the just do it behavior, wherein it's focused on firefighting, wherein the improvement team have this mindset of the more the better, instead of investigating more deeply about the actual condition and the obstacle first. So it goes from your actual condition directly to conducting the experiment. The second behavior or old behavior, if you don't have structured approach, is the jumping into conclusions. So without you or without the team precisely describing the obstacle or understanding the root causes, the team easily jump into conclusion and then plan for the execution of that solution. So it goes from 2 to 4. And the last behavior, we call it try some more, wherein the team will just have to think of different ways on how they will address the obstacles without them learning from the result of the experiment. To recall, the key message of this lesson is number 1, every experiment teaches you something new, and every new lesson you learn increases your capability to accomplish great things. Key idea number 2, you learn the most from what doesn't go well. And key idea number 3, when conducting your PDCA experiment, you should always predict what will happen, run the experiment, and check the result against your prediction and learn from it. So thank you for listening and see you in the next lesson.